civilization that would be a high society. And interestingly enough, many of the tales that they recorded in the first written language, called cuneiform script, literally right out of the Stone Age, the first written language, this culture has a very advanced mathematics, astronomy, and everything that they say that they learned from beings that came from another planet within our solar system. They called it Nibiru. Now, the kicker of why this is interesting is this Sumerian legacy, this information they've left us on stone tablets, mind you, meaning their writing was left on stone tablets, unchanged to this day, speak of many tales that parallel modern biblical information. And one of those, of course, is a great flood. So we have, for instance, in Genesis, a story of Noah being chosen by God to build an ark. And, this whole story plays out. It lands on a mountain. They send out the dove. He brings back a branch. Well, there's actually a Sumerian derivative, a stone version of this tale.
Oh, my, yeah.
Yes, and it's 4,000 years before the Christian version. And it's stored in the British Museum as the Flood Tablet. It's written in this cuneiform script, and it speaks of how another planet, a much larger planet, was pulled into our part of the solar system and became a permanent member of our solar system on a highly elliptical orbit. And early on, the Sumerians have a very detailed description. Just like in Genesis there are 7 days of creation, well, the Sumerians have 7 tablets, stone tablets, 7 stone tablets of creation that also tell the story in a much longer format, which also include this additional planet that, as you eloquently mentioned, they described having, a large part of our solar system's formation, which also included, let's say, 4.7 billion years ago or so, an encounter with our primitive Earth that over time, as it orbits through our solar system, it has caused effects on Earth. And one of those was when it passed by Earth the last time, let's say roughly 4,000 years ago, it's theorized that it cracked off one of the glaciers, the ice sheets in Antarctica, instantly raising the water levels around the world 300 feet.
What about Atlantis, going back even before the flood, if it existed? Might that have been caused by a calamity when this so-called Planet X came around during that time period?
Well, that's a really good question, George. That's definitely where my research is leading me, is everyone has heard of the idea of Atlantis, and they think of some advanced culture that lived on a continent that somehow sunk. And I don't see it that way. My research shows me that if there was a highly technological civilization before the epoch era that we can pinpoint now as saying, what we're talking about tonight, the Sumerians 6,000 years ago, right out of the Stone Age, we have the evidence. There is actually evidence all over the world, on every continent, huge pyramidal structures or megalithic monuments that suggest there must have been some advanced technological culture 10,000, 15,000 BC, that we still can't pinpoint, yet if there was a technologically advanced civilization, they would have been on a continent, they would have been a worldwide civilization. So it is a very interesting correlation, George, that we see the pyramids in Egypt and their astronomical connection, for instance, to the Orion constellation, and the pyramids in Mexico having astronomical alignments. Maybe there have been some type of cataclysmic events that didn't just wipe out the Sumerians, they wiped out life worldwide. But it's been very hard to pinpoint even accepting a global flood because archaeologists and the worldwide accepted view for did a flood even take place, no one can accurately prove that with science yet.
You know how the book of Revelation talks about wormwood, and, it really doesn't give us the exact idea what wormwood could be, whether it's a planet, comet, asteroid. It is some kind of, I believe, celestial object. But could wormwood be a Planet X that creates this havoc whenever it gets close?
Well, I think so. There's an interesting correlation here with, again, what we're going to talk about is Sumerian references to a Planet X, and these all predate all of the English or the Old Testament versions of stories that we have from biblical information. So we really have an interesting piece of this story to start with when we look at the fact that, in the early 1900s, British archaeologists started doing excavations in Iraq, and in the early, we're talking like 1890 through 1910, let's say, really early 1900s, they're pulling out tablets from Iraq that show what the Sumerians called Anunnaki, basically angels, if you will. They gave the term Anunnaki, which translates into those who from heaven come to earth. And they had all these other tablets that, for instance, described the orbital patterns of the planets, distance between the planets. They talked about this additional planet, Planet X, Nibiru. And so in the early 1900s, remember, we didn't discover Pluto till 1930, all these archaeologists seeing this information about Anunnaki and living on Nibiru and Planet X, they put all of this into a big myth pile. They didn't understand. They didn't understand these references. So even to this day, we have a disconnect where archaeologists and the astronomers aren't talking, and that we see an obvious disconnect where they don't recognize any of the ancient sources as scientific data. It's mythology, meaning it's some culture that's making up a story to explain their origins or their beliefs and, their creation story. However, when we start to apply, at least focusing on this amazing data from the Sumerian culture, when we apply science, a lot of the stories start to take new shape.
Jason, the Planet X and Nibiru discussions that have been held for, ages. Do we believe if these ancient astronauts came from that planet, might they still be there now? Is the planet dead? What do you think is going on with those extraterrestrials? Well,
it's a very hard question to answer.
Sure.
Even with our sciences, again, there's kind of a line in the dirt that says very simply, modern academia is not willing to accept the idea that extraterrestrials exist now or ever have. Period. So if you can get beyond that, you can see this information being relayed by the Sumerians about this culture for coming from a Planet X. And it's very hard to prove. But again, George, when we start to use science to confirm some of these stories, it starts to raise your eyebrow a little. For instance, this idea of a Planet X, the Sumerians say that this planet is on a very highly elliptical orbit, kind of like a large egg-shaped
3,600 year.
3,600 years, correct. So if you understand that all of our planets, meaning, for instance, Earth, it goes around the sun once every 365 days. That's a solar year. Nibiru goes around our sun once every 3,600 of our years. That's one solar year for Nibiru. So a lot of the answers to, how could a planet like that goes so deep into space support life? Where's the heat source? How does this happen? Again, the science starts to answer that question. If we are a binary solar system, and as Image pointed out by imaging other external solar systems, it saw the first planet around another star actually was on an elliptical orbit, it starts to raise the idea that, well, maybe our Planet X is orbiting so far into the depths of space that it goes towards that other second sun and loops back around towards us. Now, Nibiru is described by the Sumerian culture to be a very red, glowing planet. And they described that the Anunnaki living on this planet, they're gods, just like the Bible says, we were created in their image and after their likeness. These Anunnaki stated to the Sumerians that they came here originally to repair Nibiru's dwindling atmosphere, meaning they said that their planet, on the Anunnaki's rise to their own technological civilization, they've messed up Nibiru's atmosphere. So that was one of the reasons why they came here to Earth originally, was to mine gold, which we'll discuss further.
Absolutely. Much more to come on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, next hour, Eric Parker joins us. He is the webmaster for Zecharia Sitchin. Zechariah's website, Sitchin.com. And we'll continue then to talk more about Planet X when I come right back. Jason Martell on Coast to Coast AM. Jason, so they needed to mine gold from this planet. God knows how many tons of gold they pulled out of here and sprinkled it up in their atmosphere. And you think it worked?
That's a good question. Did it work? Will we ever meet these Anunnaki? Are they still inhabiting Nibiru or Planet X? So hopefully our modern science will find this planet, because if we do find a planet 4 to 8 times the size of Earth, not just some chunk of ice floating out there beyond Pluto, 4 to 8 times the size of Earth is the descriptions by the Sumerians. A big red glowing planet. Could even be seen by day. They have stone tablets which show, for instance, the Sumerian plowing a field. They were the first ones to have agriculture, by the way, too. Mm-hmm. You see them plowing a field, you see the sun, and they're looking up in awe at the glowing red cross in the sky. Another interesting fact, 4,000 years before Christianity,